Cronenberg Middle School was shut down in 1999 after Geraldine Bone blinded the vice principal and murdered 6 children. Geraldine was a 43-year-old black woman who worked as one of the school's lunch ladies. For 20 years she would get to the school before sunup, then set about preparing lunch for 300 snotty-nosed brats who either acted as if she didn't exist or treated her as if she were a second-class citizen. During those 20 years, she had been yelled at more times than she could count, cursed at, told she was ugly, laughed at because the kids saw being a lunch lady was shameful, and even had food thrown at her. But one Friday, in the fall of 1999, as she was dishing out ham and mashed potatoes, Rob Newsom, a 13-year-old entitled little snot, had thought it would be cool to impress his friends if he spat on her and said, "Serve me now, loser." And that had been the last straw. Geraldine had all that she could stand, and she snapped. She leaned over the counter, snatched Rob by his hair, which caused his smirk to melt into shock, and then slammed his face into the steaming container of hot potatoes. With her other hand, she took a serving fork with 4 long, sharp tines and stabbed him in the neck. As she did, she said,
"Sure, I'll serve you. I'll serve you like a slaughtered pig, you little snot."
The cafeteria erupted into chaos. Kids screamed and ran in all directions. Trays clattered to the floor, milk spilled, food was smeared. Some girls slipped, some boys fell, and by the time deputies arrived on the scene, 6 kids were dead, including Rob, and the vice principal had been made blind when he attempted to subdue Geraldine, and she'd used a melon baller to scoop out his eyes. Geraldine had been shot and killed that day, and in a terrible twist to the already disturbing story, her son, DeMarcus, was so distraught about losing his mother that he snuck into the gym that night and committed suicide in the middle of the basketball court. Like his mother's, DeMarcus's story was one of constant disappointment. Before being closed, Cronenberg Middle School had a thriving sports program. Known as the Cronenberg Scanners, their football, basketball, and baseball teams were always good enough to make it to the state playoffs, and their girls' volleyball team had been ranked number 2 in the country. DeMarcus had wanted to play on the basketball team, but was physically and socially awkward. He was, however, given the opportunity to become the school's mascot, which was a character named Scanny. Scanny was the caricature of a man dressed in a white button-down shirt, black vest, and dark tie. He had an overly large head with thick veins rippling down his face. Both his mouth and eyes were wide, as if in shock and pain and anger. During games, Scanny would pump up the crowd by rolling out an effigy of the other team's mascot, whose head was rigged with a couple M80 firecrackers. Scanny would wave his hands menacingly, then put his fingers against his large, veiny head, as if focusing all his thoughts and rage against his rival, and the M80s would go off, exploding his opponent's head in a spray of crimson-colored confetti. Even the opposing team would cheer at Scanny's dark theatrics. But, unfortunately, giving life to Scanny was not enough to stop the other kids from mercilessly bullying DeMarcus. Maybe, if he'd had friends, he would not have felt so alone that the only way out of his grief was suicide. For the rest of that school year after Geraldine's and DeMarcus's deaths, strange occurrences and horrible accidents occurred that left 2 teachers and 4 other students maimed. The kids began whispering to each other that it was the ghosts of the lunch lady and Scanny, and that they were doling out revenge. When the school was finally let out for summer that year, the school board decided it was best to close the school, and ever since then, it had stayed boarded up at the far end of town. But the rumors persisted that the ghosts of the lunch lady and her son still haunted those dark hallways and empty classrooms. And every Halloween since then, it had become a rite of passage for kids to challenge each other, to sneak into the school and mercilessly taunt Scanny and the lunch lady in the hopes that they would appear. Over the years, 15 kids were found dead on the school premises after such shenanigans. 8 of them had their eyes scooped out, and the other 7 were found missing their heads. The witnesses said that it looked as if their heads had exploded, splattering gore in all directions. The local authorities in town always had the same explanation about these deaths. They claimed that the missing eyes and exploded heads were caused by unfortunate electrocutions due to the power never being cut off at the school. Of course, they never explained how those electrocutions occurred, which only fueled the imaginations of the kids in town and spurred on their yearly Halloween tradition. A year ago, in effort to put a stop to any future deaths, the mayor had issued an ordinance declaring that the school was condemned and that anyone seen on the property was subject to arrest. This only served to keep the casually curious away. It did not, however, stop Trevor. Trevor had told the whole basketball team, of which he was captain, that he was going to challenge Scanny and the lunch lady to show themselves, and he had brought along 5 of his friends. Well, only 4 were friends. He had brought Richie along in case the lunch lady or Scanny did appear and decide that they still had a thing for killing kids. If they did show, Trevor was going to let them have Richie, so that he and his real friends could escape. See, Richie was not athletic at all. He was one of those artsy types. He had mouse-colored hair and braces and pasty skin. That was because all he did was sit inside and draw all the time. Sure, his stuff was cool, especially his pictures of scantily clad Viking babes, but he was too quiet and thoughtful, and he was uncoordinated. So much so that if the lunch lady or Scanny did appear, Trevor figured all he and the rest of the group had to do was run faster than Richie. This was basic alpha male mentality, or as Tamika, Trevor's girlfriend, would say, jock logic. Tamika was pretty, with mocha skin and raven hair, and she was a genuinely nice girl. Trevor didn't really like her, though he thought she was hot. He was with her because she was a challenge. If he could get her to go further than first or second base, he would really have accomplished something. It would be nothing like when he scored the winning basket at state earlier in the season, but still, it would be something to brag about. Trevor did, however, have a thing for Ilya, but he would never be able to do anything about it. Ilya was into anime and dressed in such a style that was almost cosplay. While he liked it and thought it was cool, he knew his friends on the basketball team thought she was weird, and no matter how much he liked her, he had a reputation to uphold. So he secretly pined for her, cast glances at her when she wore those odd dresses, and awkwardly tried to speak to her about how cool it was when she wore her makeup like she was in one of her favorite anime shows. Ilya hated jocks. They were arrogant, self-centered, and saw girls as conquests. She noticed when Trevor glanced at her. She knew his awkward compliments were because he liked her. But even if he wasn't a jock, she liked guys who didn't care what their friends thought. She liked guys who were self-aware enough to know what they liked and were willing to take a risk to ask a girl out, no matter what their shallow-minded friends thought. Besides, Ilya had been harboring a crush on Carter. She liked Carter because he didn't give a flying lizard about what anyone thought about him. He played drums in the school marching band and was the drummer in a local rock band named Groom Lake, and had long blonde hair that he'd dyed blue, and would absolutely geek out about Supernatural, which just happened to be a TV show she also liked. Earlier in the school year, she'd made up her mind to ask Carter out, but had decided against it when his dad suddenly died. She wanted to let him process his grief and to heal before she took a shot. But a few weeks back, she had taken an art class and met the quiet and shy Richie, and to her surprise, she had developed a crush on him. Even though she didn't like Carter anymore, she was happy to see that he was smiling a lot more and some of his relaxed cavalier nature had returned. Carter really liked Ilya. She was very pretty and she was crazy smart. She had all these cool interests with anime, books, and music, but most of all, she was just cool, and he felt good when she was around. And he knew that at some point she had liked him, but he wasn't looking for any kind of a relationship. He just wanted to focus on his music. If it hadn't have been for his bandmates, Frederick, Julius, and Valentine, he would have probably lost his mind because he and his dad had been very close. It was his dad who had given him his first drum lesson, introduced him to the music of the Foo Fighters and the Smashing Pumpkins, and had been at every one of his shows. There were times when he felt adrift without his dad's guidance and support. There were days that he felt that life had no meaning, no purpose. But he'd remember that his dad was probably the world's most sincere optimist, who believed that anything was possible if you used your God-given talents to help people or make the culture better. So, in honor of his dad's optimism, Carter had decided not to give up. He would embrace life, and he threw himself into his music, and he tried to write the coolest songs possible so that people would, at least for the length of a song, forget all the hate and vitriol and pain and suffering that this world offered. Carter wanted to create an energy and vibe that welcomed all people into his life, even the school's hottest girl, Daniela. But when it came to her, he had to admit that her narcissism made that difficult to do. Daniela loved herself for what she was doing tonight. It made her feel good that she decided to come to this icky, boarded-up school with these poor souls, or as she called them, the sad ones. She normally only associated with the wealthiest and most popular kids. But tonight, she'd been invited to come along by Trevor, who was her stepbrother. She'd originally said no, but after second thought, she realized that she could take pictures and video and post it all to her social media and gain a new group of followers. Just last week, she surpassed 100,000 followers, which were made up mostly of other girls who aspired to be as pretty as she was, and horny men who liked the pics she posted of herself in her bikini. And tonight, if she posted all this spooky crap, she might broaden her appeal to the kinds of people who were into all this stupid, spooky stuff. She really didn't care who her followers were, just as long as she had them. And she had chosen the perfect outfit for tonight. Black leggings, black leather boots, and a cute little pink and white midriff hoodie that had the phrase Latina Hottie written across the front. Her hair was perfect and her makeup was sublime, and she'd gotten a new manicure. She was ready for her debut as a sexy ghost hunter. She checked the time. It's 10:30. Let's just get this over with. I've been invited to a party that starts at midnight. Trevor looked confused. What? Whose party? Alejandro's, she replied. She had a smug smile. Alejandro Moreno was a local legend. He'd spent 5 seasons in the NBA, then moved to Hollywood and starred in a couple action movies. He was 35, had a thing for younger women and threw parties where only the most popular and most powerful in Nevermore Hollows were invited. His parties are notoriously raunchy, Trevor said. You're only 17. How did you get invited? Then he realized that his stepsister would do literally anything to increase her social standing. Wait, never mind. I don't really want to know. Ilya couldn't resist taking a stab at Daniela. You must have gotten the hoe invite. Up yours, nerd, Daniela replied. I won't even touch that one with a reply, Ilya said. Trevor saw this was a moment to try to get on Ilya's good side. Come on, Daniela, don't call Ilya a nerd. Ilya turned to Trevor. I don't take the word nerd as a pejorative. It's actually a compliment. Trevor didn't want Ilya to know that he didn't know what pejorative meant, but he also wanted to seem smart, which he wasn't, so he gave Daniela a stern look. For real, sis, don't always try and pejorative people. It's not nice. Ilya shot a glance at Carter and Richie, who she knew were readers and had a good grasp of the English language, and they all three snorted. Trevor didn't like their response. He gave another feeble attempt at using the word correctly. Don't be a bunch of pejorative assholes. And when Ilya, Carter, and Richie laughed aloud, he attempted to reestablish his dominance. I'll kick your asses if you don't stop laughing at me. Oh, come on, man, Carter said. Tone back the aggression. Yeah, Richie said. We're sorry, man. We're not trying to be mean. Ilya had been moved to laugh harder than the other two. She wiped at her eyes. Look, I'm as surprised as anyone that we're all here together tonight. So let's just have a fun time and see if we can find the lunch lady. And her head-exploding son, Scanny, Richie said. Don't forget him. Richie couldn't believe he was with this group of kids, especially Ilya. He'd had a hard crush on her for 2 years. He hated that he was such a coward and afraid to talk to her or ask her out. And even though he was here with her, having fun, being here made him feel guilty about leaving River, his little brother, at home. Richie had just turned 16 and River was 8. Richie loved River a lot. River liked a lot of the same things Richie did. They'd spend hours reading comics, drawing, talking about who was best, Batman or Spider-Man. Richie was firmly in the Batman camp while River was a huge Spider-Man fan. And watching their favorite spooky shows. And just like Ilya and Carter, they were massive Supernatural fans. Every year since River was 2 years old, they would dress up on Halloween and trick-or-treat together with their mom and dad. But this was the first time that Richie had ever been invited by people his own age to do something on Halloween. And he really wanted to come, even though it hurt his heart to see the disappointment on River's face. Especially since this year they had talked about going together as Batman and Spider-Man. He was about to ask how they should proceed when, in the distance, they heard tinkling music. It reminded him of the music played by the snow cone truck that wound its way through the neighborhoods during the summer. But something was off about it. After a heartbeat, he realized it sounded warped, as if it were being played on a tape deck that was running low on batteries. And it was getting closer. They stood at the back of the school so they would not be seen by any passing cars. They didn't want anyone to call the sheriff on them. There were no lights on inside or around the abandoned school property, and 30 yards behind the school was the sprawling playground, which consisted of a field that had been used for both soccer and football, which was surrounded by a cracked and weed-stubbled running track. The bleachers had long since been removed. There were 4 banks of field lights used for night games. They had not been used in decades, but a single light from the bank closest to them blinked on. It cast a murky spotlight on the track. Other than this light, the field was cast in darkness. The syrupy snow cone music got louder, closer, and from the gloom emerged a toddler-sized car. It was painted creamy white and was spotted with red, orange, blue, and green polka dots. There was a large red clown nose in the center of its grille. It had only 2 doors, and on each door was a sign that read, Psycho Juju's Clownorama, fun for everyone. However, someone had crossed out the word fun and scrawled chaos above it. It pulled to a stop in the center of the spotlight, and then the music stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the driver's side door creaked open, and from inside the tiny circus-colored car came a deep, resonant chuckle. It was deliberate, derisive, and human, but it was also unhinged, menacing, and simian. The teens watched in wonder as a capuchin monkey climbed out of the car. It was slightly larger than what was normal for that species, and it wore a white suit with a black bow tie. The suit was speckled with the same color polka dots that were on the tiny car. The monkey's face was smeared with red grease paint, and someone had drawn a ragged, hypnotic swirl around its left eye. When the monkey climbed up onto the top of the car and directly into the center of the spotlight, they were able to see that it wasn't polka dots on his suit, but instead tiny, skittle-colored pentagrams. The monkey stood on the car's roof, his hands on his hips, and to their amazement, it spoke to them in clear English that was infected with monkey inflection.
Well, what do we have here? A group of delinquents up to no good?
There was a long moment where no one said a word as they attempted to process what they were seeing. It was Trevor who finally found the words. What the hell are we looking at? Trevor's words loosened Daniela's vocal cords. Did that monkey just speak? Tamika squinted at the monkey standing on the clown car. No way, this is real. The monkey's lips spread into a wide simian smile that exposed his sharp fangs.
Oh, it's real. I'm Psycho Juju.
He spread his arms wide and said,
And I brought clowns.
The passenger door to the tiny car swung open, and a woman crawled out. She was dressed as a cheerleader clown with black and white paint and dirty crimson-colored pom-poms. Her hair was pulled into a greasy ponytail and held in place with a blood-stained bow. She crawled on hands and knees a few feet away and stood, staring at the kids. Her eyes were vacant. Her mouth hung slightly open. Under the makeup, the kids could see that her face was swollen and distorted, as if she'd been severely beaten. Another clown crawled out of the car, also dressed as a cheerleader. Her face and uniform were splattered in blood, as if she'd just participated in a violent murder. And then more cheerleader clowns began crawling out of the car. When Carter was 10, he'd gone to a massive 3-ring circus in Atlanta. They'd done the multiple clowns and the small car gag. Even at that young age, he was able to apply logic and work out how they had pulled it off. It was simple, really. The car was completely hollowed out, and the clowns just contorted themselves inside. But conventional logic could never explain what he and his friends were now witnessing, because what they were seeing was impossible. Psycho Juju's car was much smaller than the one used in the circus. It was barely bigger than one of those battery-powered Barbie cars, able only to fit 2 children or 1 small adult. It was as if the tiny car was being used as a portal, which these clowns were using to enter the schoolyard from some alternate psycho-circus reality. By the time they were done, 13 cheerleader clowns had crawled out and stood quietly staring blankly at him and his friends. And every single one had that creepy, vacant stare, and they'd all been severely injured to some degree. Ilya grimaced when she noticed that one was missing a hand. Its stub was wrapped in blood-soaked bandages. It looks like they've been tortured. Psycho Juju glanced at the clowns and then to Ilya. He shrugged.
I may be a little hard on my pets.
That's it, Trevor said. I'm out of here. He turned and started walking back around the school, but before he had taken 5 steps, a shot rang out, stopping him in his tracks. The girls screamed, and Carter and Richie let out surprised curses. Trevor turned to see that one of the clowns had been shot in the neck. She had fallen to her knees, and though blood spurted out of the wound, she showed no emotion. She stared blankly at the kids. Psycho Juju still stood atop of the car in the hazy spotlight. He held a pistol in his hand. A thin ribbon of smoke slithered out of the barrel and curled up into the air in slow serpentine coils.
Nobody leaves,
Psycho Juju said. Then he leveled the gun on the injured clown and shot her in the temple, spraying blood onto the other clowns. Tamika wanted to be strong, but she started to shake and cry. Ilya was speechless and couldn't find the power to move. Daniela grimaced at the carnage, then bent over and vomited onto the ground. The guys were just as shocked and as horrified as the girls, but they cast glances at each other and took in their surroundings, their minds racing to find a way out of this nightmare. Tamika spoke, her voice shaky. Why did you kill her? Psycho Juju gave them a surprised look.
Why did I kill it? To get your attention. And because it's fun.
He leveled the gun, pulled the trigger, and shot another clown. She fell to the ground, a hole through her heart. Psycho Juju gave a long, wicked, simian-human hybrid laugh. Let us go, Trevor said. Please, just let us go. We won't tell anybody what we saw here. Psycho Juju scrunched up his paint-smeared face.
Why would I want to do that? It's Halloween, and I have a treat for you.
Another clown crawled out of the car. It reached back inside and dragged out a child. It was a boy of 8 years old, and he was wearing a Spider-Man costume, minus the mask. The boy resisted but was unable to escape the grip of the clown. "River!" Richie yelled. That's my little brother. How did you get him?" River was crying. The tears streamed down his face. "Richie, I snuck out and was going to follow you, but they got me. I'm scared. Please help me." Richie wanted to run to his little brother, but he was afraid that Psycho Juju would shoot either of them or both of them. He was so scared that he couldn't think clearly. He wanted to be strong and take decisive action, but he didn't know how, and he hated himself for it.
There's more,
Psycho Juju said. From the driver's side door, another clown clambered out with another child in tow. Everyone knew this kid, too. It was Bucky, River's best friend. He was dressed as Superman, but someone had smeared his face with red, white, and green grease paint. He was shaking, eyes wide, but he wasn't crying. In fact, he looked as if he were quickly nearing a catatonic state. But when he saw Richie and the other kids, his eyes came into focus. He locked them onto Trevor, who was the biggest and strongest. "Please, help us. The monkey says he's going to feed us to the lunch lady. Please don't let him do it." Psycho Juju leaped from the roof of the car onto the hood. He pointed the gun at Bucky's head and pulled the trigger. The boy fell onto the ground in a heap. Then Psycho Juju looked at the stunned group of teens and said,
"Oh my, did I break some kind of rule that says I can't kill a kid?"
Tears streamed down Tamika's face. "You're terrible," she whispered. Psycho Juju squinted his left eye, the one with the hypnotic swirl, and said,
"I'm not terrible, little girl. I'm evil. There's a difference."
Carter had seen enough. His dad had always taught him to stand up to bullies, and though his dad was no longer among the living, Carter wanted to honor his memory by being brave. Even though this was terrifying and surreal, he couldn't let anyone else get hurt. He stepped forward, pointing his finger at Psycho Juju. "Enough! Leave us alone!" Psycho Juju raised the gun and shot Carter in the chest. He fell dead onto the ground amid the screams of Tamika, Ilya, and Daniela. Psycho Juju's laugh rang out into the night. When he regained control of himself, he said,
"Let's play a game. I'll hide River in the school, and you have to come find him before I put a bullet in his brain. You have 1 hour, understood?"
Richie's voice was shaky as he answered for the group. We understand."
"There's a catch that makes the game so much more fun. My friends, the lunch lady and her bastard son, will be roaming the halls looking for you to serve you up and blow your mind, if you catch my drift. Oh, and you can't leave or I'll kill you. The clock starts now."
He gave another simian hybrid chuckle and snapped his fingers. He and River and the clowns and poor Bucky's body disappeared in an oily black cloud that reeked of sulfur. The girls were crying. Trevor kept glancing around as if he were thinking about running away. Richie was shaking and numb. He knew he had to save his brother, but he didn't have a clue how. In many of the stories he liked to read, the hero would always take a heartbeat to assess the situation, so he took a couple breaths to try and calm his mind. Carter was dead, which was so bad on many levels, but in this situation it was worse because Carter was brave and smart and strong. He could have been a big help. Richie glanced at the girls. Daniela was too much of a diva and would be no help. Tamika talked tough, but he was pretty sure that was an act. But Ilya Even though she dressed like an anime character, she seemed confident and strong, even in this insane situation. Then Richie looked at Trevor and could see that he was trying to figure out a way to escape without helping them find and save River. "Don't you even think about it," he said. Trevor cut his eyes at Richie. "I don't have to be here. It's your brother. I'm not going to die for him." "You've got to be kidding me," Tamika said, a disgusted look on her face. "You're the biggest and strongest person here. You should be the leader, not a coward. Why am I even dating you?" For the briefest moment, Trevor looked conflicted. After a heartbeat, self-preservation took over. He had an image to uphold, and if they survived this, he didn't want it getting out that he was a chicken-hearted punk. "I'm not a coward," he shot back. "And I don't know why we're dating either. It's not like you're giving me what I want with your old-fashioned morals." Tamika frowned and said, "Jerk." She looked at Daniela and Ilya for support. "That's what you get for dating jocks," Ilya said. She glanced at Carter's body. Her heart ached and she was terrified. The best way to not end up dead is to have a clear mind and make good decisions. Besides, we have more to worry about than shallow relationships that won't mean anything after we graduate. Daniela had been crying, but now had control over herself. She was shaken, worried that she would not survive this horror fest and get back to her followers and her life of influence. Instead of wiping her eyes, she waved her hands in front of her face to dry her tears, then used her phone to check her makeup. Suddenly, a realization struck her. "Hey, wait a minute. We can call for help." She frowned when she saw that she had no service. She didn't even have those little SOS letters in the upper right-hand corner. The others all checked their phones and found that they were also without cell service. Richie was on edge. Not being able to use his phone was frustrating. He pointed across the field. "There's no way we don't have service. There's a cell tower right over there, not half a mile away." "What are you saying?" Tamika said. "You think that monkey is somehow blocking our signal?" "Has to be," Richie replied. You saw how he just made himself and River and the clowns disappear. He clearly knows how to use some kind of magic." Trevor wanted to run away, but was stopped from doing so because he didn't understand what Psycho Juju meant when he said if any of them tried, they would die. It was just enough of a threat to make him realize that there was a better chance of survival as a group. Besides, if any of these losers survived and it got out that he was a coward, he'd never be able to live it down. And he had to make sure that nobody questioned his alpha male status. He looked at the time on his phone. "It's 10:35. We have less than an hour, so let's just get this over with," he said and stomped off toward the school. The others turned and followed him. When they got to the back door, they found that it had been jimmied open, likely by other kids years ago when they had come to test their luck. They glanced inside. It was dark, but each of them had brought a flashlight. They switched them on and stepped through the door and into the domain of the lunch lady and Scanny. They were in the middle of a hallway that ran east to west. To their right, the hallway disappeared into darkness. 30 feet down on their left, there was an intersection with another hallway that ran north. "Which way should we go?" Tamika asked. Even though she thought him to be a jerk, she clung to Trevor's arm. Richie was scared too, but he was worried about River. I think the question is, if you were an evil monkey, where would you hide a little boy in this creepy-ass school? Ilya saw the worry on his face and put a hand on Richie's shoulder. It's going to be okay, she said. We're going to find him. Richie was consumed with fear, self-doubt, and worry, but Ilya's touch made his heart skip a beat. He was surprised that it seemed to steady him, make him want to be braver. Thanks, Ilya. That means a lot. Where do we even start to look? Tamika said. Like Tamika, Daniela was also standing close to Trevor. I bet the monkey took River somewhere gross, she said. I hate to say it, Ilya said, but Daniela may be onto something. Daniela shot her a mean girl look. Bite me. Richie ignored their catty exchange. Okay, it does seem that Psycho Juju has a flair for the dramatic, and it makes sense that he would take River to the worst place in the school. There was a moment of collective realization for them. Then Tamika said, That's the cafeteria or the gym. From what Psycho Juju told them, the lunch lady and Scanny were real. If they were to accept this as true, then it was true that the school was haunted, and the evil events that occurred to prompt the haunting started in the cafeteria and the gym. I say we start with the cafeteria, Ilya suggested. But what if the lunch lady's there? Daniela asked. I don't think we should all go. Maybe we should split up, Trevor said. He nodded at Richie. You and Daniela can go to the cafeteria. Ilya and Tamika and I can search the rest of the school. Anger rose so fiercely in Richie that he wanted to punch Trevor. You don't want to go to the cafeteria because you're a chicken. And I noticed that you didn't say you wanted to search the gym. I thought you jocks were supposed to be brave with all your alpha male BS. Trevor shot an embarrassed glance at Ilya. Then he stepped aggressively toward Richie. Don't call me chicken. I'll kick your ass. Tamika yanked on Trevor's arm, pulling him back. Stop it, Trevor. You did sound kind of scared, and now you're just being an ass. Trevor yanked his arm free from Tamika's grasp. Well, I may be an ass, but I'm no chicken. Richie knew that the best thing was for them to stick together. Sure, they'd cover more ground if they split up, but that never ended well for the folks in horror movies. And this was a real-life horror situation they were in. Splitting up would make it easy for the lunch lady and Scanny to pick them off one by one. There's strength in numbers, he said. Let's just make our way together and let's start with the cafeteria. Trevor knew he had to save face in front of the girls, especially Ilya. So he stood taller, squared his shoulders, and took the lead. Well, follow me. Let's go kick this monkey's ass. Ilya rolled her eyes behind his back. Tamika looked embarrassed that she was dating him, and Daniela hurried behind him, keeping close to him. But they all fell in line behind Trevor, with Richie bringing up the rear. They made it to the intersection of hallways. When they looked down the north corridor, they realized it was where the administrative offices and the nurses' station were located. There were 4 doors on each side, separated by dusty glass cases that, to their surprise, still held tattered ribbons and tarnished trophies from when the school was open for business. The cases were not only filled with awards. In the beams of their flashlights, they could see old photographs of Scanny. To their horror, they saw that they were not your normal action shots of Scanny performing his antics on effigies of teams' rivals' mascots. Instead, these photos showed Scanny standing over the headless bodies of opposing teams. The pictures were gruesome, disturbing, and seemed so real. Daniela's face shone pale in the glow from the flashlights. How is this even possible? Evil magic, Ilya replied. Come on, Richie said, his voice edgy. He checked his watch. It was 10:42. They had only 48 minutes left. We don't have time for this. We've got to move. Ilya put a comforting hand on his shoulder. Think positive. Don't let the strangeness of this get into your mind. There was a sound behind them from the direction they'd just been. They turned and shined their flashlights into the darkness. Standing at the end of the hallway was Scanny. His cartoon large head was matted with black grime, as if it had been slowly decaying in one of the abandoned school storage closets for the past 25 years. But his large, bulbous eyes had an eerie luminescence. It made him look as if he was an old black-and-white movie hypnotist who was trying to mesmerize them. Daniela grabbed Trevor's arm and pulled herself close to him. "What's happening?" she said in a quavering voice. Tamika clung to Trevor's other arm. Is that really Scanny, or is it someone wearing the costume? Either way, it's gross. It's creepy the way he's just standing there, Ilya said. Slowly, Scanny raised his right arm. As he did so, he leaned toward the group. His bulging eyes focused on Trevor. He raised the fingers of his right hand and touched his temple, as if he were in deep thought. Okay, what's he doing? Richie asked. With Tamika and Daniela still clinging to his arms, Trevor took a fearful step back. Man, I don't like the way he's looking at me. Ilya glanced at the trophy cases to her left. The beam of her flashlight fell on one of the pictures of Scanny performing his macabre trick with a mascot from an opposing team. She noticed that he was now taking the same pose as he was in the picture. Her heart raced, her breath caught in her chest, but she was able to choke out, He's doing the head exploding thing. Not on me, he's not, Trevor said. He shrugged free from Tamika and Daniela. He turned to run, but then cried out in pain. He used both his hands to grab his head. Daniela pointed her flashlight at him as she stepped back, but Tamika reached for him. What is it, Trevor? Tell me. Tears spilled from Trevor's eyes. In the glow of Daniela's light, they could see that his eyes were bulging and bloodshot. Ricky kept his flashlight on Scanny, who now had both his hands to his temples and was staring directly at Trevor as if trying to read his mind. Trevor clawed at his head as if trying to break it open to relieve intense pressure. He gave a guttural scream, then, with a wet pop, his head exploded into a chunky spray that covered Daniela and Tamika and the cases on both sides of the hallway. Tamika screamed. Daniela turned and ran blindly down the hallway, away from the group and from Scanny. Richie grabbed Tamika by the arm and pulled her toward one of the doors. He prayed it was unlocked. Ilya followed him, but she yelled at Daniela, "Stop, Daniela! We don't need to split up!" Daniela was lost in panic. She reached the end of the hallway and turned down another, out of sight. Richie yanked at the door handle. When he realized the door was unlocked, he hissed, "Yes!" He turned to Ilya and Tamika. "Hurry, inside, now." The girls ran into the room, and he followed and yanked the door closed behind them. Ilya was crying. Richie was shaking. Tamika was making gagging noises as she wiped bits of Trevor's exploded head off her face and neck. Richie locked the door and shined his light around, frantically looking for an exit or some place to hide. He saw an old box filled with discarded cleaning supplies. Beside the box was a grimy rag. He grabbed it and handed it to Tamika. She snatched it with trembling hands and used it to wipe away the gore. Tears streamed down Ilya's face, but she had regained enough composure to observe the room they were in. There was a counter in front of a sliding window that opened into a small workspace. To their right was a door that led into that smaller space. "This must have been the check-in office," she said. Richie stepped over to the door and tried to open it. It was locked. He then shined his light through the dusty window. He noticed that the glass was thick, likely shatterproof. "There's a door in there, and I wonder if it leads out back into the school." Tamika had been successful in only getting the worst of the gore cleaned from herself. She was wearing a sweater over a t-shirt. The sweater was a mess. She removed it and dropped it to the floor. There were still blood smears on her neck and forehead. She was clearly in shock, and in a distant voice she said, "I've got to get out of here. I can't be here. I'm going to lose it." She looked up at Richie. "Get me out of here now, please." Richie had never been in a situation where he had to be the leader. He didn't know what to do. Ilya saw the lack of self-confidence on Richie's face. She realized that this wasn't a Hollywood movie where stick-thin women could overpower the big baddie without the help of a man. If they were going to survive, they needed to work together, and even though Richie wasn't very athletic, he was still the strongest of them. "Richie, we need you," she said. "How do you think we can get in there to the other door?" Richie had never had anyone show any confidence in him before, and coming from Ilya, it forced him to try and believe in himself. He glanced around the room. There was a yellow hardback chair that had been turned onto its side in the corner. It had metal legs. He stepped over and picked it up, intending to try to use it to smash the glass, which he hoped was not shatterproof, but before he could attempt to do so, Tamika screamed. He and Ilya turned to see what had caused her alarm. In the door leading to the hallway was a thin vertical rectangle of window. Scanny was peeking through at them. As they watched, he raised the fingers of his right hand to his temple and locked his eyes on Tamika, who instantly began clawing at her head. Richie had a sudden flash of understanding. "Cover up the window with something," he said to Ilya. I think maybe he needs line of sight to be able to use his power." Ilya frantically looked around the room for something to cover the window. She saw nothing. Tamika was now making groaning sounds. She bent over in pain. Richie tried smashing the chair against the window, separating them from the office, but the glass made a hollow reverberation sound and didn't even crack. Tamika dropped to her knees and threw up onto the floor. Her face had turned dark and veins stood out in her neck and temples. Ilya saw an old poster that had once hung on the wall, and it had fallen and was stained from age and covered in dust on the floor. She ran to it, snatched it, and slammed it over the window that Scanny was looking through. There was no way for her to secure the poster, so she had to hold it in place. And the thought that she was so close to Scanny repulsed her. Immediately, the pressure in Tamika's skull vanished. She stopped groaning in pain and collapsed face down onto the floor. Richie's hunch had been correct. Scanny needed line of sight. "Tamika, honey, get up," Ilya said. "Please, get up and help Richie figure a way into the office." Richie swung the chair 2 more times against the glass. Nothing happened. Tamika slowly pushed herself up onto wobbly legs. She steadied herself by leaning against the wall. Suddenly, Scanny hammered himself against the door, causing it to rattle in its frame. Ilya let out a small squeal and nearly dropped the poster. She turned her attention to keeping it over the sliver of window and realized that for the first time, the poster displayed a kitten hanging on a rope. Above the kitten were the words, "Hang in there," and below its dangling feet was written, "Be positive." She wanted to find whoever had created this stupid poster with its stupid pun and wanted to punch them right in their stupid face. But before her mind could entertain how good it would feel to release her rage, Scanny slammed against the door again. There was a crunching sound as the center of the wooden door splintered. The door stayed secure in the frame, but she figured that the door wouldn't last much longer. "Hurry and figure something out," she yelled. Tamika stumbled from the wall toward Richie. Did you try opening the sliding window?" Richie grimaced at the realization that he'd let his fear cloud his judgment to such a degree that he had not thought to check this possibility. He dropped the chair and put his hands against the sliding window. And to his surprise, it moved. He had to use a lot of force because it had become stuck in its track, but he was able to slide it 3/4 of the way open, and it would be enough for them to crawl through. He motioned for Tamika to go first. Then he stepped over to Ilya and put his hands on the poster. "Go," he said. "I'll stay here until you two get through. Hurry." Ilya locked eyes with him. "Thank you, Richie." He gave a small smile that had the hint of confidence, but it melted when Scanny punched the door so hard that his cartoon-gloved hand poked through the center. Tamika had made it through the sliding window. Ilya ran over and crawled onto the counter and through to the other side. Richie let go of the poster and ran across the room and dove across the counter and through the small opening and landed with a grunt onto the floor. Tamika had scrambled to the other door and opened it. She peeked out and said, It's another hallway. Come on." Ilya helped Richie up, and they ran past Tamika, who held the door open for them. When they were through, Tamika slammed the door shut behind them. They took a beat to let Richie catch his breath. Tamika had lost her flashlight at some point, but Ilya still had hers. Richie also had his, and they shined them around, getting their bearings. They were in another hallway lined with classrooms. Ilya pointed her light at a faded mural of Einstein and Sir Isaac Newton. "This must be the Science and Biology Hall." A few yards to their left was an exit, but Richie's light showed that it was chained and padlocked. The windows were too small to crawl through, even if they could find a way to smash them. Besides, he was not leaving without his little brother. At the far end of the hallway to their right was an intersection, but it was too dark to see any detail. Tamika was nervously rubbing her hands on a clean spot of her t-shirt. It seemed that it was a subconscious act to try and clean her hands from any remnants of Trevor's blood. What do we do now?" she asked. Richie wanted to take longer to consider their options, but they heard a crash and a tinkling of glass from the room they had just left. Scanny must have broken through the outer door. They were out of time. Richie took off down the hallway. The girls followed him. When they got to the last door before the intersection, Richie grabbed the handle and pulled. It was unlocked. He shined his light inside and saw that it was a biology lab that had 4 tall workstations that were large enough for them to hide behind. "In here," he said. "Let's hide behind one of these stations and try to figure out what we can do next." They slipped inside and turned off their flashlights. The door slipped quietly shut just as Scanny burst into the hallway behind them. In another part of the school, Daniela was running. Her mind was wild, her heart raced, her stomach churned. She moaned in disgust at the smell of Trevor's blood on her arms, neck, and face. She glanced over her shoulder to see if she was being followed, saw that she wasn't, and her feet got tangled, and she fell hard, sliding a few feet along the tiled floor. She was able to hold on to her flashlight, but she accidentally switched it off during the fall. She lay on the ground in a beam of grimy moonlight that spread through a hole in the boarded-up windows. She sobbed for 1, 2, 3 heartbeats, the tiny spark of hope igniting in her soul that maybe she was safe from Scanny. Then went completely quiet when she heard a woman's voice say,
"I hear a little snot roaming around. I'm gonna find you and serve you up like a slaughtered pig."
It was the voice of the lunch lady. She couldn't tell from which way it had come, but she had to do something because she was lying in the middle of the hallway. The safest thing to do was to push herself up against a wall and hope that the lunch lady would pass her by. She squinted into the darkness and caught glimpses of tiny, reddish glints in the coal-black shadows. She realized that those little moments of muted flicker must be eye-shine from rats or other vermin. As gross as the idea was, she knew that she had to crawl toward them and hope that her presence would scare them away. Holding her breath, and as quietly as she could, she crawled on her hands and knees into the deeper darkness of the hallway. Her heart sank when one of her sneakers made a tiny rubbery squeak as it moved. The lunch lady gave a twisted little laugh.
I heard that, little snotty. I know you's trying to skitter away.
Daniela stifled a terrible sob. "Please, please, please, don't let her get me," she thought. But she heard movement. It was difficult to know how far away. Then the lunch lady said,
"Time to serve you up with some gravy."
The lunch lady's voice was too close. Couldn't be more than a few yards away. Daniela was now sitting against a wall, trying to push herself into a tight little ball. She put her hand over her mouth to stifle her breathing. She heard a rustle of clothing. The quiet yet deliberate thump of footsteps as the lunch lady slowly walked toward her. It was too dark to see any detail. Only a darker shape in the darkness. Daniela was holding her breath, but her heart was beating so fast that she was using up all her oxygen. She needed to breathe. She dared not to. Her lungs began to ache as the lunch lady walked past her. Thank God, Daniela thought. She didn't see me. Farther away now, the lunch lady said,
"I know you're here, you little snot. I'm gonna scoop out your eyes and serve them to you. Make you eat 'em all up."
Daniela's chest burned. Her heart hammered. She began to get lightheaded, but she forced herself to not breathe. Farther away still, the lunch lady called out,
I'll cut open your skull and serve your brains to your friends. I'm gonna find you, little brat. I'm gonna find you. I'm gonna serve you up with mashed potatoes and gravy.
Daniela heard the lunch lady take another couple footsteps that were clearly nearing the end of the hallway. Then, quiet. Daniela continued to hold her breath, listening. It was difficult because her heart hammered, slamming blood through her veins, causing it to pulse in her ears. After long moments, her heartbeat slowed, only a little, but just enough to slow the rush of blood so that she could hear better. It was completely quiet. She waited another minute, listening. Nothing. The lunch lady was gone. Daniela felt the flashlight in her hand. It was the type that was fitted with an LED light that could be dimmed or focused into a tighter beam. It was only a small thing, yet the weight of it grounded her, helped calm her. She had the idea that even though it was small, she could maybe use it as a weapon. This thought brought her a little courage. Realizing that she couldn't sit in this position all night, knowing that the only way to survive was to move and find a way out of the school, she decided to switch on the light. As one of the legions of vapid internet influencers, Daniela had come to believe in the New Age idea of the power of manifestation. She thought that if she chose to believe in something strongly enough, she could force the universe to provide whatever she wanted. Though she was terrified, she chose to take a deep breath and manifest a way out of this horrifying situation. She began to repeat silently in her head, I am going to make it out of this alive. She moved her thumb over the button and switched on the light. Glaring down at her was the lunch lady. Her eyes shone wild in the bright beam. There were bloodstains on her uniform and her apron. In her left hand, she held the serving fork with its long, sharp tines. In her right hand, she held the melon baller.
It's lunchtime, sweetie.
Daniela screamed. The lunch lady slammed the serving fork down onto her forehead. Daniela's screams became choked gurgles as the tines broke through her skull and pierced her brain. The lunch lady giggled as she squatted down in front of Daniela and used the melon baller to scoop out her eyes. In the biology classroom, Ilya and Richie and Tamika heard screaming coming from deep within the darkened school. That's Daniela, Ilya whispered. Her voice was quivering. Tamika was crying softly. She wiped the tears away. Her face was a mixture of terror and anger. The way her scream was cut off, that gurgling noise she was making. I think she couldn't say the word, but Richie and Ilya were also thinking the same thing. Then, Tamika's anger momentarily took dominance over her terror. I want to kill that damn monkey. A piercing squeal of feedback erupted from the speaker set in the wall at the front of the room. There was a muffled thumping sound, as if someone were tapping a microphone. Then they heard Psycho Juju's voice.
Is this thing on?
The question was followed by a demonic monkey laugh.
Attention, students. This is your principal speaking. There's only 3 of you left because that jock got his mind blown and the girl lost her vision. You only have 20 minutes left. I suggest you stop playing hide and seek and come save the boy. He doesn't look so good.
River's voice came through the speaker. Richie, come save me, please. I'm scared. It's worse than when you showed me that Nirvana video. Psycho Juju chuckled.
Poor little River. He now only has 19 minutes before I let the lunch lady serve his brains to my clowns.
There was a click, and the speaker went quiet. Tamika nervously bit her lip. How are we going to find him? He's in the gym, Richie said. Even in the gloomy shadows, Richie could see that Ilya shot him a confused look. How do you know that for sure? Last year, River went through this phase where he was easily scared. I showed him the video of Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana, and it really creeped him out. Ilya loved Nirvana. It was one of her favorite bands. Oh, yeah, I get what you mean. That video was shot in a gym. He was giving you a hint, wasn't he? Tamika said. Richie nodded. He's a smart kid, so I think so. He hesitated for a heartbeat, realizing that if he was wrong, there'd not be enough time to save his little brother from his demonic monkey and insane clown posse. Richie stood and slowly crept toward the door, keeping low. He quickly scanned the room for anything that could be used as a weapon. His eyes settled on a heap of items on one of the other tables. Something had glinted in the feeble moonlight that shone through the dust-caked window. He stepped closer and saw that it was a small aluminum case. It was covered in decades of dust and grime. He quietly flipped the latch and opened it and realized it was a dissecting kit. All the instruments were missing except for a scalpel and a small pair of pointy-tipped scissors. These were not the best of weapons because you would have to be up close and personal to even use them with any effectiveness. But they were better than nothing. He took the scalpel and handed the scissors to Ilya, who seemed to be more in control of herself than Tamika, and therefore more likely to stay calm in the heat of battle. Tamika glanced around and saw a wooden rod leaning against the wall. It tapered on one end, and she realized it must have been used by the teacher as a pointer when giving lectures. She snatched it and held it close. She seemed to draw some courage from the makeshift weapon because she stood straighter. Richie stepped to the door and peeked through the small rectangular window, hoping that Scanny had moved on out of this hallway. Beyond were only deeper shadows. When his head didn't explode, he felt it was okay to take a risk and open the door. He turned the handle and quietly stepped into the hallway. Ilya and Tamika followed him. He then slowly, quietly closed the door. He took out his flashlight and turned it on its lowest setting. It caused a pale glow to surround them. He shined it to their right and then back toward the administration offices from where they'd come when they were being chased by Scanny. It was clear. He shined it in the other direction. It was also clear. "Which way to the gym?" Tamika whispered. The school wasn't very large, at least not by modern-day standards, and it was easy for Richie to get his bearings. "Follow me," he said, and took off to the left, away from the administration offices. They made it to the intersection of hallways and stopped. He shined the light to their right and to their left. clear. We need to take a left here, and at the next intersection we take a right, and then that's where the gym is. Suddenly, Tamika gave a pain-filled gasp and cried out in agony. Ilya and Richie shot at her a look and saw that her eyes were bulging and her temples throbbed as if her brain were pulsing and swelling inside her skull. Richie and Ilya both reached out to her, intending to grab her and pull her along behind them as they ran. But before they could touch her, Tamika's head exploded in a wet pop, spraying them in the hallway in gore. Tamika's body dropped to the floor. Richie shined the light around in a wild arc, looking for Scanny, and there he was, 30 feet behind them in the biology hall. Without a word, Richie grabbed Ilya's hand and pulled her along with him as he ran toward the gym. Ilya was gagging. He fought back his own revulsion, forcing himself not to think about the fact that they were again covered in one of their friend's brains. They shot down a long hallway and then turned left at an intersection. The beam from Richie's light cut through the darkness and fell upon Daniela's body. She sat on the floor, leaned against the wall. The lunch lady was hunched over her, scooping out her eyes with a melon baller. Richie stopped short. "Oh, my!" Ilya moaned in revulsion. The lunch lady stood, holding the melon baller in one hand and one of Daniela's eyes in the other. She turned and held it out to them. The pale glow of the light caused deep shadows to distort her face. She smiled and said,
"Just in time for a snack."
She opened her mouth and plopped the eye onto her tongue. As she chewed, she said,
"Juicy."
Richie and Ilya shot off around her. Surprisingly, the lunch lady didn't attempt to snatch them or chase them. She simply watched them run as she chewed on Daniela's eye. At the end of this hallway were the doors that opened into the gym. Each door had a small rectangular window, and a sickly yellow glow oozed from them. There was a clock on the wall. It showed 11:25 p.m. They had only 5 minutes left to save River. Every instinct told Richie not to enter the gym, but those same instincts told him this was where Psycho Juju was holding his little brother. Ilya clung to him. She was shaking with fear, though he couldn't tell because of his own terrified quaking. She shined her light behind them and gasped. The lunch lady and Scanny were behind them, blocking their way. The only direction they could go was forward, into the gym. Richie stepped over and peeked through the windows. The room was dark except for a single cone of diseased-colored light that came from a fixture in the ceiling and fell onto the center of the basketball court. River was tied to a chair in the middle of that light. His head hung down, and his shoulders slumped, and he was crying. He looked tiny and frail and pitiful. Over his Spider-Man costume, he now wore a basketball jersey from one of the rival schools. Richie realized it had the number 13 on it, like what was in all those pictures of when Scanny would bring out an effigy of the mascots from rival teams. Beside him on the gym floor was a Marshall electric guitar amp. The small red light on the faceplate burned a hateful red, indicating that somehow the amp had power, though the school had not had any in decades. A guitar cable hung from the input jack and snaked along the floor and disappeared beyond the sick-colored cone of light. Richie's desperation surged. His ears rang from stress. His heart ached at the idea of losing his brother. But suddenly, anger boiled up in him. He had seen enough death tonight. He knew now was the time to stand up and be a man, something he'd never been able to do. He had to save his brother. He had to protect Ilya. Yeah, she was a strong girl, both physically and mentally, but he could tell she'd reached her limit and had slipped from terror into a state of fatalism. He could see it on her face. He was going to save both River and Ilya. But how was he going to do it? He didn't have a plan. He couldn't see a way to survive what came next. But he remembered all those cool stories he'd read, those that were full of heroes who pushed their fear down and strode confidently into danger, trusting that instinct and determination would help bring victory. He grabbed Ilya's hand and gave it what he hoped was a confident squeeze. Then, still holding her hand, he stepped through the doors and into the gym. A moment later, Scanny and the lunch lady followed them inside and stood in front of the doors, blocking their way. Richie felt that, at least for the moment, those two ghosts or undead creatures or whatever they were would not attack. They were simply standing their ground to make sure that Richie and Ilya witnessed the sick drama that was about to unfold. Then, suddenly, both his and Ilya's flashlights flickered out. The only light was what was shining on River in the center of the basketball court. The darkness around them seemed to have substance. It was warm and moist against their skin, and they both felt as if the shadows were molesting them. River looked up. His eyes were red from crying, wild from fear, but when he saw Richie, there was a spark of hope. "Richie," River cried, "don't let him kill me." Richie tried to speak, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "I won't let him. I promise." From the darkness came Psycho Juju's laugh. There was a series of clicking noises and a neon buzz from the darkness above them as some of the other lights began to flicker on. It sounded as if evil bees were angry that they'd been awakened from a hellish slumber. The bile-colored light increased only slightly, but enough to show that the 13 cheerleader clowns that had poured out of Psycho Juju's tiny car were now standing in a circle around River. Every clown had a blank stare. They were holding blood-colored pom-poms. Psycho Juju stepped out of the darkness into the circle of light and stood next to River. His red-smeared face with its black swirl around the eye gave him a hellish kabuki mask that caused madness to squirm at the edges of Richie's and Ilya's minds. Psycho Juju lifted his head and closed his eyes and took 2 long sniffs of the air.
Ah, the stench of anxiety and angst and self-loathing still permeate this building.
He opened his eyes and locked them onto Richie and Ilya. Then he cracked a fang-filled smile and said,
It smells like teen spirit.
As if on cue, which was likely the case, a discordant noise oozed from the amp. It was as if a ghoul had crawled from a shallow grave, found an electric guitar, and was attempting to strum the instrument. There was movement beyond the cone of light. Ilya and Richie gasped when another clown, dressed in a striped long-sleeved shirt and torn jeans, shambled from the shadows. This one was male. Its greasy, shoulder-length blonde hair hung down around his face, which was covered in mold-colored grease paint. Red makeup was smeared around his eyes, and a sickly green color looked as if it had been literally smacked across its lips. It was slowly, awkwardly, absent-mindedly strumming a pale blue guitar. A dozen razor blades had been pushed into the body of the instrument, and with every downstroke they sliced into the clown's hand, wrist, and arm. Blood smeared the instrument and dripped onto the floor. The clown shuffled over and stood beside River. He stopped strumming and looked over at Psycho Juju. Something in the monkey's dark eyes seemed to squirm with delight at the macabre spectacle. He snapped his simian fingers, and one of the cheerleader clowns stumbled forward. She fell to her knees in front of the guitar-wielding clown and gazed up at him with soulless eyes. Psycho Juju looked at Richie and Ilya.
Hello, kiddies. Tonight's entertainment will be provided by Kurt the Clown. Take it away, Kurt.
As if those words were filled with electricity, Kurt's body spasmed. Then he slowly unslung the guitar from around his body, held it high, and slammed it down onto the cheerleader's skull. The weight of the guitar smashed a dent into her forehead, while the razor blade sliced through her skin. Blood was flung through the air as Kurt raised the guitar and slammed it down 2 more times onto her head. Bone crunched. Flesh was shredded. A puddle of blood seeped around the cheerleader's lifeless body. Psycho Juju gave a chaotic laugh.
Oh, what a lovely mess you've made. What's next?
Richie and Ilya could see what the evil monkey was leading to. River was going to be next. Their minds raced as they tried to see a way out of this situation. Just stop it, Ilya said. Her voice was shaky. She was trying to buy time for a miracle. She hoped Richie's mind was less clouded with fear so that he could figure a way to save River and get them out of this cursed school. Psycho Juju cocked his head at her, feigning confusion.
Why would I do that? This has been so much fun.
Rope was wrapped around River's torso with his arms to his sides and around the back of the chair. Rope also secured his ankles to the front legs of the chair. Richie could see only one possibility. It was a Hail Mary act of desperation, and it would only buy them a few extra heartbeats of life. But he had to believe that it would be enough to allow another solution to present itself. He locked eyes with River, trying to convey to him through that single stare that he needed to try to tilt the chair over. He also hoped that River would know that it needed to be timed just right so that it would be a distraction. Richie's plan was that River would tip over the chair and that it would cause a few seconds of confusion. During those precious seconds, Richie planned on bum-rushing Kurt the Clown. He hoped that Kurt would drop the guitar and that Ilya would be able to grab it and use it as a weapon. River's eyes squinted ever so slightly. He knew that his big brother was trying to convey something, but he wasn't sure that he understood. Then he saw Richie cut his eyes to the side. His mind raced for a moment, still not understanding. Then he thought that maybe, just maybe, he did understand. Richie wanted him to try and tilt his chair over. Not realizing that Richie was hoping for perfect timing, he jerked to the side, and the chair tipped onto 2 legs but fell back flat. Kurt the Clown jerked forward, raised the guitar high, its blood-stained razor blades gleaming dully in the putrid light. Richie gave a yell and surged forward. Ilya realized what was happening and shot forward toward River just as the kid heaved with all his might and tipped the chair again. It popped up onto two legs and seemed to balance for an eternity. Kurt slashed down with the guitar just as Richie slammed into him. River's chair finally fell over and landed with a thud that knocked the breath out of him. Kurt the clown dropped the guitar when Richie plowed into him. Ilya grabbed a handful of the rope that secured River to the chair and pulled him out of the way just as the guitar fell onto the floor with a bang that caused feedback to squeal from the amp. It missed River by a mere inch. Richie and Kurt rolled across the floor and into the darkness beyond the cone of light. Ilya used a small dissecting scissors to start cutting the ropes that bound River to the chair. And Psycho Juju looked on and screeched in laughter. He hopped around in a little demonic dance, as if wildly entertained at the chaos that played out before him. Richie cried out from the dark. It sounded full of rage and pain and remorse. Ilya was crying. Her tears made it difficult to cut the knots. She wiped the tears away, giving her enough clarity to finally be successful. She pulled River free, and they stood and scrambled away from Psycho Juju and the remaining 12 cheerleader clowns. River cried out, "Richie!" Psycho Juju stopped his insane laughter, but he continued to bounce side to side in wicked delight. For a long moment, it was deathly quiet. Psycho Juju, Ilya, and River all peered into the darkness where Richie and Kurt had disappeared. After what seemed an eternity, there came a low moan. Then there was movement. Ilya and River held their breath, and a pale hand reached out into the light. It held the scalpel and was covered in blood. Slowly, Richie emerged from the shadows, crawling on all fours. He was bleeding from scratches on his face and neck and from bites on both his forearms. He pushed himself up onto his feet and stood tall. He locked his eyes on Psycho Juju. "Your rock star clown won't hurt anyone ever again." He glanced at a clock on the wall. It was 11:28 p.m., and we saved River before the time was up. You lose. Psycho Juju raised his eyebrows as if in surprise that the kids had pulled it all off. The hellish kabuki paint on his face made the gesture look demonically psychotic.
Oh, well, the deaths were fun and the chaos exquisite. I'm going to go now, but first, a joke. What did the cheerleaders think about the pep rally?
Richie was physically sore and soul-weary. He wanted this to just be over. He felt that the demon-possessed monkey would only leave if he played along for this last insane moment. He shrugged and said, "I don't know. What did they say?" Psycho Juju's fang-filled smile grew wide.
They said it blew their minds.
Suddenly, the cheerleaders all dropped their pom-poms and grabbed their heads. Tears dripped from their lifeless eyes and smeared their hellish clown makeup, and they began to groan and moan. Ilya and Richie understood what was happening. Scanny was working his psychic powers upon them. During the scramble to save River, Scanny and the lunch lady had stepped into the fringe of light. The lunch lady looked on with eager glee while Scanny held both his hands to his temples, as if focusing all his telekinetic powers onto the cheerleaders. Ilya didn't want River to see what was about to happen, though she knew she wouldn't be able to shield him from seeing the aftermath. But she grabbed him and pulled him close, his face into her chest. The cheerleaders' moans grew in volume, and then their heads popped in a series of chunky explosions. Their bodies fell to their knees, and their hearts continued to pump for long, terrible moments, their necks becoming fountains that sprayed blood onto everything. Even Psycho Juju was covered. His white suit with its tiny, festively colored pentagrams was now soaked crimson. He tilted his head back and gave a monkey hoot, snapped his fingers, and disappeared in a black, foul-smelling cloud of smoke that smelled of sulfur. The lights went out, leaving Richie and Ilya and River in the dark with the dead. Richie's heart hammered. He feared that the lunch lady and Scanny were creeping toward them in the blackness. He snatched his flashlight and fingered the switch. He was grateful when the light flickered on. Ilya held River close, whispering to him to keep his eyes closed. She used her free hand to switch on her flashlight. She and Richie swept their beams around and were relieved to see that they were alone, except for the headless bodies of the cheerleaders. Scanny and the lunch lady had disappeared with Psycho Juju. Richie noticed that one of the exit doors had been pried open at some point during the past. "Hurry," he said to Ilya. "You and River follow me." They ran across the gym and out the door and into the cold night. When they got to the road, Richie tried his phone and saw that he now had service. He called 911. He knew he couldn't relay everything that had happened tonight to the dispatcher. They'd think it was a prank call. So he simply gave the location and said there'd been a murder and that they needed to send help. Even though the dispatcher was still talking, Richie disconnected the call and pocketed his phone. Now that they were safe, he grabbed River and pulled him into a hug. After a long moment, River pulled away and thanked him for coming to save him. Richie was shaking. He guessed it was the adrenaline that was still surging through his body, but on a fundamental level, he felt different. As he considered what this difference was, he realized that he was no longer scared, at least not in the way he'd been scared his whole life. Ever since he could remember, he was afraid to take any real risks. He played it safe, and he had felt as if he were in a prison of his own making. Even though he wanted desperately to have some friends, out of fear he had almost declined the offer to tag along tonight. But when he had found out that Ilya was coming, he had mustered up the courage to say yes in the hope that maybe, just maybe, she would notice him. And suddenly, he was overcome with a profound understanding. The world is filled with bullies and crooks and murderers and monsters, and it is the fear of those things that cause people to play it safe. And when you play it safe, you miss opportunities, and that makes you miserable, which leads to depression and self-loathing and loneliness. That was not living. That was a fate worse than death. He realized that the truth of this epiphany should be a call to action. It should be a command to shed life of timidity and to live boldly. Didn't he read something about that somewhere in the Bible? Either way, he now had a deeper understanding of that old maxim, "Nothing ventured is nothing gained." So, with the sirens in the distance, he looked at Ilya, and she looked back. And he saw something in her eyes that he couldn't describe. It was clearly thankfulness that he had helped keep her alive. But maybe there was something more. Whatever it was, he knew that no girl had ever looked at him that way. And so he decided to continue his new life of boldness. He stepped closer to her. She did not retreat. He took her hands and pulled her into him. She did not resist. He leaned forward, and she raised her lips to his, and he kissed her. It was short, it was sweet, and her lips were so soft. And when he pulled away, his heart was pounding, and even though they were surrounded by darkness and oppression, he felt full of light, and he felt free.